I've been working on preparing some in-depth tutorials, and during my prep for these, I've been discovering a lot of cool little things that I wasn't aware of in Studio One. Some of them I was aware, but I just forgotten. So I figured I'd take a moment to create a video that's just a collection of cool little tips for Studio One. So that's what we're going to take a look at here. And also some of these, those of you who have been using Studio One for a while may be aware of them, but for any newcomers, these are going to be particularly useful for you. And for those of you who have been using Studio One for a while, there should still be some cool things in here that you may want to watch for. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. And the first thing that we're going to take a look at is the mouse tools. And for those of you who have been using Studio One for a while, you're probably aware of this, but when we have the mouse tool active, we can press the control key. Right now I have the arrow tool, but we can press the control key to access an alternative tool just for quick access. So by default, when I press control, we're going to access the range tool. And the reason why that is because this is underlined, the range tool. You can't really see it. But if I press 1 on my QWERTY keyboard, notice here that the split tool is going to have a line underneath it. So now when I press control, we access the split tool. So then I can come in and make a cut. I'll control Z. If I press 1 again, then you see our line goes to the erase tool. When I press control, we access the erase tool. Press 1 again, then we access the paint tool, and so on. So I'll repeatedly press 1, and we can choose all of these tools as alternatives when we use control. Now, a couple other ways that we can quickly access the tools is by right-clicking in an empty space. Then we can come up here and choose the tools as well. There's a submenu for the paint tool because it actually has a few different modes there. And probably the quickest way that we can access the tools is by clicking on the mouse wheel, and then we can choose a tool in that way. Now moving on, we have an input quantize here at the top. And when we activate this, Studio One is going to automatically quantize our MIDI recordings to the quantize setting that we have here. So if you're recording MIDI, a lot of times we will we'll select that event or select the MIDI notes and then press Q to quantize those. But if we'd like, we do have the option to quantize while we're recording by activating the input quantize here. And if you are someone who's maybe playing complex parts, maybe you're a piano player, and for some reason there's just a slight bit off your MIDI notes, your recordings, and it's kind of driving you crazy that they're not really as tight as you'd like for them to be, and you've tried lowering your latency, there is another feature that you can take a look at to help alleviate the issue potentially. So if I control comma to bring up the options menu, and then on the advanced tab here, if we come to MIDI, we can see we have a record offset. So here you can start off with something small like 12 or 15 milliseconds, not 115, but 15. And if you put this in here, again, start off small. This can really help you get to where it is precision perfect, your MIDI playing. For most of us, I don't think it's going to be an issue, but if you're, again, playing complex parts and you're finding that it's just not as tight as you'd like for it to be, and it's bugging you, then this would be another area to take a look at beyond adjusting your latency or buffer settings. But I'm going to set mine back to 0. I'll press cancel actually. So let's take a look at our events here now. I recently had someone ask me if we can change the color of our waveforms. And while we can't change the waveform color, I think he was saying that in Cubase you're able to do this. Our waveform is going to always be black. As far as I'm aware, I haven't seen anything different in the manual. But we can change the color of our events. First, we can change the color of our track. So here we have this blue border, and if I click on that, then we can choose a different color, and then that's also going to change our event as well. But we can change our events individually if we'd like to do that to help us better identify them. And so if we right click, then we can see here we have this color box. If I click on that, then I can come in and choose a different color like so. Just keep in mind that if you'd like to change it back, you're going to have to manually do that here within this color palette, because if I come to this border here and then change to, I'm so indecisive right now, change that, then it's not going to change our individual event, which makes sense because if we've gone through and made a bunch of changes, we wouldn't want to lose those changes by just clicking on this one section here. Now we also have the ability to rename our events. So if I right click up at the top here, I can double click and then we can rename this, our individual events, to be whatever we would like. And then I believe with 4.5, we now have a time lock and edit lock here. So by default, the behavior is going to be that, of course, we can click, hold, and drag these wherever we'd like. If we have our snap engaged, then it's going to snap to whatever value here. So if I change this to quarter note, we're snapping to quarter notes. If I disengage, then we can move it about freely. But we do have the ability to lock this into place if we want to be sure that, you know, if we spent lots of time adjusting something and we don't want it to move, we can select the time lock. And now that that's active, if I click, hold, and drag, it looks like it's going to move, but it doesn't go anywhere. It's just stuck there until we unlock it. So I will go ahead and deselect. And now that that's done, I can move it once again. Now, along with the time lock, we also have an edit lock. So by default, if I select the split tool, I can come in and make cuts and divide up our event like so. I'll Control Z. Now we're back to one event. If I right click and do edit lock, let's come back to our split tool. Now I'm trying to cut and it's not, you know, we have the crossfades in the top right and left corner. Those are not accessible. So this is just not available for editing when we have it locked in this mode. So that is another feature to be aware of. I'm going to deselect that. Now something else here in the menu is the speed up, and that's also actually available in the inspector down at the bottom. But I would just like to mention that, so here I have this loop, it's a drum loop. I'm going to go ahead and play this back. Our click track is on, and just listen to hear that it is not matched up with our current tempo. Okay, so we can hear that that's not matched up. And if I come to the end and hold Alt and then push that in, then this should be lined up. Actually, it's not, because before I renamed this, I think this was 75 BPM. So really what we would want to do is pull this out. So I'm going to Control Z to get rid of that. Come back to the end again and press Alt. And then let me pull this out to the 7. And then now, okay, now they're matched up. Okay, but most of us have seen that and we know that that's available. But what I wanted to show is that when I right click, the speed up has been changed to 0.8. And the reason why I'm mentioning this is to let you know that you can use this as a tool to experiment with, say, vocals or other instruments. Say you're not necessarily wanting to adjust the timing of something, but you would just like to experiment with it. You can use this as a tool to do that. Let me Control Z and take that back to 1. This is going to play back as it is, but we could come in and just double click. And if I put in, say, 0.5, press enter, then this is going to play this back at half the speed. I'm going to turn the click track off. Okay, there are some artifacts in there, so let me Control Z. Let's right click. Let's try out 0.75, press enter. Okay, so this is going to speed up or slow down the playback of your audio file, your sample, your loop. without changing its pitch. So if we were to change this to, say, 1.5, press enter. Okay, so this is another tool that you can use to experiment with sound design. Particularly, I'm thinking of something like vocals, and you can create some interesting effects with that. And so just be aware that while we do have we can come to the end and hold Alt and match up the timing, we can also come in and just experiment with the speed up ourselves and see what we can come up with. I'm going to go ahead and put the 1 back in there, press enter, and then now we should be back to as we were. Okay, next up, we're going to take a look at impact. So let me come to the instruments and let's bring this in. And I'm a heavy user of impact. So these couple of things I was not aware of, and I'm pretty excited about them. So the first one is if I come to browse and I'm going to come to the files and I'm going to drag this 808 onto the pad. Now, sometimes I will bring in a couple, 2 or 3 808s and just manually transpose those to get it to fit within my song. And normally I just drag one in, drag the other one in, and then drag the third in or whatever to the separate pads. But really all we need to do, we can actually copy our samples to other pads directly within Impact. And I think one reason why I didn't think this was available is because when you right click, I would think that you could choose copy and then you would have paste available here, but it wasn't, so I just thought it wasn't possible. But if we hold Control, we get the hand, and then I can click and drag that over and add it to other pads. You do need to be sure that it's selected first, the particular pad. Then just as you hold Control, you get the hand, and you can click that and drag it wherever you'd like. So now we've got that same 808 on all of the different pads. The other cool feature that I wasn't aware of, I'm actually going to load a kit in here, is that we can select multiple pads at a time and adjust parameters and routing for multiple pads at a time. So we've got our kick here, and of course I can transpose that. But say we had a group of pads or samples that we would like to adjust the pitch of at the same time, I can hold down Shift and then click here. Now we've got all of those selected. And first, let's listen to these back. Okay, hold Shift, select there. I'm going to transpose that crazy to make it obvious. Okay, so you can hear that those have all been adjusted. I'll hold Shift and select them all again. And then I'm going to Control click to set them all back. Now, while they're selected, we could also change the routing. So we can see that right now this is going out to stereo 1, stereo 2, stereo 2, stereo 2. But we can come and then choose, say, mono 1, and then now they've been routed all to mono 1. We can also solo them all at the same time. We can mute them all at the same time. Okay, so this is, for me, this is huge as someone who uses Impact to create drums and even entire songs. These are going to be a tremendous help for me. Now, you can select all of them at once, but you're going to need to come to the first one here, hold down Shift, come to the top, and then now we've got them all selected. Now, the next thing we're going to take a look at is the MIDI editor, and I'm going to double click to add a MIDI part here, and double click here. Let's add some notes. That's actually a cool sound. So we've got some MIDI notes in here, and I want to change this to the melodic mode, and I'm just using the Impact. This can be done, this is going to be actually probably be more useful for something like a synthesizer if you're using a synthesizer, but we can see that as I move along here, take note of the keyboard. You see how these turn a gray to help you identify where you are. So as I move up and down here, you can see that the keys turn gray. And that's supposed to give you an idea of where you are on the keyboard. If you're someone who wants to know what particular note you're doing, you're going to be adding to or removing. But this has always been kind of difficult to me. It's not kind of dark enough, I feel like, to help you see where it is. But one thing that we have available is the data zoom here in the bottom right hand corner. And if we come here and click and drag that up, then we can see now the note information pops up within our individual MIDI notes. So you just need to get these to where they are large enough size. And I think that by default, you're just not going to see these unless you know that the data zoom is here and make this a bit larger. And some of us may not even have known that this data zoom is here, where you can increase it vertically. Of course, we could always make it wider or zoom in horizontally with this control here, or by using the mouse wheel or just clicking and dragging. We could also use the ruler, click and hold and dragging up or down in the ruler. But I feel like this is a pretty useful feature to be able to see, immediately identify what note this is just by seeing it visually. Okay, now let's exit out of the editor and open up the browser. And the next thing we're going to take a look at is we have the ability to, say we created a hi-hat pattern or just a drum pattern that we really like and we feel like we may want to use it again, and it's a MIDI part, and we'd like to have it as a MIDI part so that in the future we could use different drum sounds with it. What we could do is just simply click, hold, and drag that over to the browser in the Files tab here, and if you take note of that window that pops up, by default that's going to save it as a music loop. So I'm actually going to just go ahead and drop it in there, and we can see at the bottom we now have this impact.music loop. So if I click, hold, and drag that into the arrange view, then that's going to load up and an impact is actually created. It's just a default kit that's loaded up. Let me mute this one. It's not going to sound like anything, but those are those random notes that I put in. So, but if you have a nice pattern or hi-hat pattern or anything at all, a melody, chords, you could kind of stockpile these things and have easy access to them. And the other option that we had was if we click, hold, and drag, as I mentioned, by default it's going to save it as a music loop, but if I press Alt, we change that to a MIDI file. So that's going to be a .mid. If you'd prefer to save it as that, then that's what it's going to save it as. And the .music loop, I believe, is a proprietary Presonus format, but the .mid is going to be able to be transferred to different DAWs, different systems. So I'm pretty sure that's what the difference is between those two. So at this point, I'm going to close out the browser and I'm going to delete that MIDI part out. Let's right click and remove track and instrument. I'm going to delete this one out, and now I'm going to hold Alt and double click to add a pattern. And so now we've got this pattern. I'm just going to add in some random notes here. And I recently had someone leave a comment asking me, well, how can I go about making my patterns have a bit more of a human feel? And we do have a swing function that we can use that's going to kind of help with that. But really, probably the more ideal thing to do would be to, after you finished your pattern, you can convert it to a MIDI part, which is going to show up in the drum editor, and you can freely manipulate your notes there and move them off the grid lines. So let's just take a look at that. I'm going to close out the editor there. If we right click on this pattern and come to instrument parts, we can see that we have convert pattern to part. Okay, so right now when I double click on this, we're taken to the pattern, and this is a very rigid structure. But if I right click instrument parts, convert pattern to part, now we've got our MIDI part. And when I double click, we have the MIDI editor, or music editor as Presonus calls it. So in this way, these are really stuck on the, let me change this to 16th notes. These are right on the grid lines. But if you'd like a bit more of a human feel, we could actually Control A to select all of these and come to the actions, and we should have Humanize down here. We can press that. You can make some adjustments, and then let's click OK. And then these have kind of been moved a little bit from being directly off of the grid lines, and it looks like I only selected the kicks there for some reason, because this was probably highlighted there. But I'm going to just click once here in the actual pattern, Control A, come back to the action menu, Humanize, okay. Now we can see that there's been a bit of movement, and then now when this plays back, it's not going to be such a rigid, robotic and mechanistic pattern. All right, so whether you're new to Studio One or an old head with Studio One, I hope that some of these things have been useful for you, and we're going to wrap up with that. I'm currently working on something, updating the in-depth MIDI series for Studio One 4.5. A lot of that has changed, and there's some new features, and the menu has changed, as we just saw when we were working in here. The actions menu is different than what it used to be. So I'm working on that, and also in an effort to try to help make all of this tutorial work and audio work more sustainable, I started a little online store, a merch for Quantum merch. It's what all the cool kids are doing, I guess. That's down in the description. There's also a link for donations. If you have found the tutorials helpful and would like to leave a tip, check it in the description. And so, yeah, there should be some more tutorials in the next couple of days and beyond that as well. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next tut. Later, y'all.